Welcome back to Pipeline to Profit, the podcast where we talk about how companies build better revenue engines through smarter systems, better data, and more connected go-to-market strategies. Today's episode is called The Cost of Intelligence: Why AI Needs Cost Governance Before It Scales. AI has moved from experiments and demos into real business workflows. That's exciting, but it also creates new operating problems. The bill is harder to predict. Usage is harder to attribute. And in many companies, the governance model has not caught up. So today, we're talking about the cost of intelligence, why AI can become expensive to run when teams cannot see what is driving the spend, and what leaders can do before AI becomes another unmanaged operating expense. Today, we're joined by Mike Danforth, founder and CEO of Cortave. Mike and the Cortave team are focused on helping companies reduce AI interference waste and bring more governance to token spend. We're going to unpack shadow AI, token waste, workflow level attribution, model routing, guardrails, and how operators can scale AI without letting cost, security, or quality get away from them. Mike, thanks for joining.
Hey, Heather. Nice to see you. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate you being here. I'd certainly love to make this really practical for our listeners. We can start with the market problem and then move into how leaders should think about governance, and then use Cortave as a concrete example of what responsible AI operations can look like. Does that sound good?
Yeah, it sounds great.
Fantastic. So before we get into Cortave, can you give listeners the short version of your path and what led you into AI cost governance?
Yeah, absolutely. We had been working with a lot of customers, everybody obviously very excited about the use of AI. I think the reality is a lot of us are still playing with AI and trying to figure out where it fits within our organization. It became obvious to us as we spoke to customers that their biggest concern was obviously rising costs. At some point in time, about a year and a half ago, everybody's kind of slapped AI on top of everything, right? And it was like, oh no, all of our license costs have gone up, but was it worth it? And so we set down a path to try and consolidate a view for IT organizations, CFOs, CTOs, CISOs, right? Anybody that's really responsible from an operations perspective or a budget perspective on, should we be doing this? And so as we set down that path, certainly cost control became the very first issue that we thought of. What is the cost of a token and should they all be treated equally? And then we realized, well, we need to be able to understand what systems are people even using. It's easy when you say, okay, everybody's got a ChatGPT license, but what do we have AI on? And why are we using it? How often are we using it, right? Is it even worth that we're using it? And then from there, we quickly realized organizations didn't just need the ability to solve for some of the shadow AI problems. They also needed to, once they did that, they needed to be able to set some guardrails in place that said, okay, how do we protect customer data? Right? Simple things like PII, don't put in credit card numbers, or more specifically, if you have an agent, don't let your customers put in credit card numbers into the LLM, right? And so over the course of the last 4 or 5 months, have essentially learned a lot from our customers and partners that the most important thing is to give IT leaders and those other senior leaders in an organization an AI operations platform that allows them to observe, govern, and control how AI is deployed within their organizations.
Oh, that's fantastic to hear, and thanks for that background there. So now, following up on that, what did your work across sales, partnerships, CRM, digital transformations, MarTech, and all of those other various things that you've done throughout your career, what did that teach you about how companies actually adopt new technology?
Yeah, interestingly enough, I started my tech career in social media. I started with a company, Radiant 6, back in 2009, and we got to see the evolution of the social media space, which isn't too dissimilar from the evolution of the AI space, right? What we saw at that time was a lot of senior leadership didn't understand social media, and so they tapped a junior practitioner to go kind of figure out if they should even be doing anything with social media at the time. That became the social listening tools really had their heyday back in the early 2010s, which gave organizations the ability to understand what people were saying about them. Well, once they did that, which is very similar to solving for the shadow AI problem, right? The observability. Are people even talking about this, right? Or are we even using AI? And what are we using it for? That quickly turned into social media policies, right? Which then turned into specific use cases for why we would use social media. So there is a direct correlation. You can follow that trend. For those of us that have been around long enough, you can follow that trend. It's very, very similar. For myself, from a sales, marketing, and customer success leader, I mean, it's not surprising to see the adoption the way that it is. Everybody is trying to do more with less, is ultimately the goal. And, we've really set unrealistic expectations on ourselves over the last 10 years, especially in the technology industry, where it was always, we've got to keep moving things forward. We got to keep moving things forward. And the economy was doing so well for quite a good amount of time. And then AI came in, and AI is not the reason the economy is not doing well. There's a lot of other issues that we know of, but it gave everybody the opportunity to say, can I do more by only having to spend a fraction more? Now, the jury's still out on whether that's true or not. And there certainly are applications where it is valuable. But much like the social media days, everybody just kind of jumped into the pool. And we're like, oh, wait, do I even want to be in the pool? Was the question that wasn't answered. And, sales organizations, marketing organizations, we hire high octane people for those roles for a reason. And so, of course, being as ambitious as they are, they jumped in headfirst to try and use AI for any number of things. And we've all seen the posts online that somebody gives you the secret sauce to a 37-step program to prompt an LLM to absolutely give you the right lead. If only it was that simple, right? But writing emails that just feel unnatural, right? And are disconnected from the human component of the relationship that mattered in the first place. And so the initial reasoning for doing it was not for bad reasons. It was for good reasons, but probably didn't quite give us the desired outcome in many of the instances that we were looking for.
Now, knowing that, were there certain patterns that you saw of things that were happening that made this problem that you really wanted to solve feel urgent enough for you to say, we need to take action right now? Like, what was that impetus?
This is probably going to be maybe not quite the path you thought was going to go with this. So they've been telling us for decades that the backbone of the North American economy is small businesses, right? So when the whole concept of agents came to market, I personally still feel that the concept of agents is a bit ridiculous for a whole number of reasons. They introduce many lanes and lines of risk. There's, from a security perspective, from a data privacy perspective, just the simple fact that you don't know what information necessarily always goes across those or how people interact with it. Cost control comes after that, but that is ultimately also a problem. But then we've dropped in the most ridiculous concept from in probably the last 20 years, agent orchestration. So now we're going to have agents managing agents that we're still unsure about the first one-to-one scenario, not even let alone a one-to-many scenario, managed by a one-to-many scenario. And so the concept of agent orchestration has always seemed a bit offside for me. But when you mirror it through the lens of the backbone of the North American economy being small businesses, what does every small business pride themselves on? It's the relationships they have with their customers. So now we're telling small businesses that the best and most effective way for you to scale is to have your customers talk with a bot.
That does sound silly, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's not going to jive for them. So there has to be value in the agents that are created. And we saw this as we talked to a lot of our customers. Yeah, there was a lot in the small, medium business segment. There were also some very large customers in there, and the concerns were the same. It wasn't that they didn't see a place for a use case. They certainly did, but they were afraid, and they still are, of what happens when. And I saw a statistic recently that said only 3 to 6% of agent pilots have actually made it into production.
Wow.
And the reason for that, there's a lot of reasons for that, but the biggest underlying one is fear. What happens when? Have we tested it enough to be certain that this thing isn't going to go offside, whether it's from a cost perspective or a data privacy perspective or a security perspective. And so for us, what became clear as we talked to all different swaths of customers was the fear of what information is out there and is this really going to help me? I don't want to lose the connection I have with my customers and partners, but at the same time, I want to be able to do more. And as everybody jumped into this, the things that were marketed for AI were all about like, oh, you need to put a sales agent on. You need to put a customer support agent on your website. It's all about a marketing agent. No, the best use of AI or the LLMs really right now at this moment in time is not sexy. The best use of it is move paperwork from desk A to desk B to desk C without human interaction. That is the
Mm-hmm.
best version that is out there right now. And it's also the safest version because it should mostly be internal. And so we knew that at that moment in time, as we were having those conversations, we really needed to give organizations the ability to understand what was being used, why it was being used, and how frequently it was being used. If I don't want to be the hall monitor, right? No,
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to be the no fun police. In fact, we've pivoted the messaging to be we can now give you the data to prove if it's being effective, what you're doing, to justify your ROI, to say, yeah, we've been able to do more because, and this is how we know, versus, ooh, you shouldn't do that because you never know what might happen. Well, you need to know, and companies need to know what's being used so that they can start to build policies around what good looks like for their organization. What works for one company may not make any sort of sense for the very similar company in the same market. It just depends on how you're structured, whether that be from a people and a resources perspective, or just how you simply have your operational protocols internally. All of those things are different. No two businesses are alike. But what is true is everybody needs the ability to see and understand, govern, and then create control so that you know what you're getting into at the end of the day.
Absolutely. So now maybe thinking about like what you're getting into and thinking about creating all of those different agents and orchestrating all of this, like when you talk to all of these different business leaders today, what part of that AI adoption feels the most misunderstood?
Oh, it really is how do we scale this, right? It is the biggest question. I think that's the biggest underlying question is how does this scale? Some of our enterprise customers that we're working with, they have pilots that they've been running for 6+ months, in a controlled environment, looking at an internal use case, right? They're pointing it at an FAQ doc section, or a customer service portal, and they're trying to use it to answer these questions. And it's a controlled environment. But their concern is that's great, but how am I going to replicate this for all of the different use cases? The one very large enterprise client we have, they've identified 6,500 workflows that they could potentially
Wow.
build. They don't even have the first one in production yet. And it comes down
Wow.
to the same problem. It's like, okay, but first we need to define the data set, define what the use case is and how we want it to use. Then we need to test it all. And then we need to see how it's operating. Now, that's just one side of the coin. Agent use cases are actually easy to pick on because it's something you have to build. People just all went and either signed up for free versions or are invoicing like commercial versions of GPT licenses, and we have no idea what they put in there. They're
Uh-huh.
like, our biggest concern when I talked to another very large, we'll call it a top 5 SaaS company in the world very recently, their biggest concern was governance. And the concern came from an angle I didn't expect to hear this early on, but they just renewed their ISO 20001 status. They know that
Uh-huh.
by this time next year, they won't be able to renew that if they don't understand what people in their organization, and they've got 70,000 employees, what
Wow.
those people are actually putting into the LLM. Well, there's this whole ignorance concept until it's no longer acceptable. They got away with it this year because there's no tools out there that allow them to see and understand what's happening. So you can play the head in the sand card for a little while, which is how everybody's gotten away with it. But they know platforms like ours, and there's others out there, but platforms like ours are changing that to the point of where they know the next year the auditors come back, they're just going to hook up a platform like ours and say, why haven't you been doing this? Why are there no guardrails in place? And so that's a very real concern for these organizations, which is it's all fine and well. Maybe we can absorb the cost, even if it makes sense, we can absorb the cost. But how do we scale it? And how do we scale it safely? And that's still the big outstanding question that hasn't been answered.
100%. And that's a really helpful setup because I feel like a lot of companies, they're excited to hear about things like AI output, but they really don't understand the operating model behind it. So that leads to a phrase that Cortave uses, the cost of intelligence, right? So when I say the cost of intelligence, what does that mean to you?
So the cost of intelligence, it's our cheeky way of saying, is it worth it? And that's not just from a monetary perspective, right? That is an effort perspective. Is it worth the level of effort to go through this? Are we going to see enough efficiency gains that it makes sense for us to run this pilot? Pilots are not cheap to run. Even if you somehow got the technology for free during that time frame, it still costs time and energy and resources, and you subject yourselves to some level of security and data privacy concerns every time you do it. And that is a process that takes a significant amount of time, which comes back to, is it worth it? And organizations, the ones that haven't moved forward, by and large, still haven't been able to answer that question. In fact, there's now a lot of data that's come out that has said a lot of the agents or scenarios that have been presumed to be justifying some of the layoffs that we've seen in the market aren't actually true. They aren't more effective by the time the token usage and the compute ultimately comes through, that it really justifies what's going on. And that is something that we say is not going to get less expensive. The financial and economic models surrounding AI right now is not sustainable. We know it's going to right side itself.
Uh-huh.
It's not an if, it's a when is it going to right side itself. And so what we're ultimately trying to get to for those organizations, when we say the cost of intelligence, is really to give people the lens to view things through, to say this is effective and worth our time and it's worth the risk, because there is risk. But all the way down to the far end of the spectrum on our platform, although we didn't set out to initially solve for this, there's a sustainability angle to this. And that comes from a resources perspective, but also an environmental sustainability perspective. What is the cost of this? Okay, let's say an infinite amount of dollars and an infinite amount of GPUs allows us to run an infinite amount of workloads across it. Is that worth it to us long term? And so we know that there's also customers out there that have come to us that absolutely want to show that they are thinking very consciously about the sustainability angle around the cost of intelligence. And we can help companies make that calculation. And that's directly correlated by how not just smart routing and caching and things of that nature, but how many prompts did we turn around? How many times did we get it right on the first try versus having to reprompt? And we can correlate that to a CO2 emissions factor, which gives them something they can turn around and say, hey, we were able to save this much in terms of CO2 emissions and increase efficiency within our organization. Sustainability checked for some. But ultimately, the cost of intelligence, subjective, but it does have an impact for all of us.
Now, that makes a lot of sense. And it seems like a lot of these costs are a lot more difficult to predict than, like, say, your traditional SaaS spend. So, when we're thinking about like some of the token based consumption items that you've been talking about, what makes that different from, say, seat based software? And where do teams get surprised by the bills?
I think the surprise comes in the unknown, right? You can sign up for a static cost for licenses, and you justify that through the business in any number of ways, depending on the department and their budget and things of that nature. And again, they were productivity apps, essentially, is what they all are. And so you could justify why you were doing that, and it's something that you can control. With AI, it's the variability in terms of what is this going to ultimately cost us, right? Initially, when all of this came about, we saw a lot of companies rebrand themselves as AI first organizations. We all know that that wasn't really what that was. You can't just slap inference on top of your pre-existing SaaS solution and call it an AI platform, unfortunately for a lot of folks. But that's what happened. And so they saw license costs just immediately shoot up in the finance office. I heard stats from different CFOs, but it was anywhere between 30 and 300% license costs increase in one calendar year. Now, again, that's back to, is it worth it? Well, maybe. But it was too soon for anybody to know. But ultimately, the unknown of we're moving from it just being included in a lot of scenarios, because the SaaS applications, they made it easy for everybody to do it, but they're also going to have to deal with the economic correction on this. As soon as the LLM providers start to increase, they're going to have to increase, which means if you're keeping it static, that license cost simply has to go up at a similar scale. Or they get into whether it's actions or tokens or any number of the different ways that we see people are bundling this stuff. It's going to become a variable cost that we're not certain whether it's your departmental budget or certainly the CFO's office, if you're beholden to shareholders, that they're just going to be okay with us slapping anywhere between, hundreds of thousands or maybe even tens of millions of dollars in AI cost onto the business without proof that it's worth it in the end.
Right. And then tying to that, like, where do we feel like some of this token waste might show up first? Do we think this is in their choice of model, the prompt design, duplicate workflows? Is this poor routing, lack of ownership, all of the above? Like, what do you think?
Yeah, it's a bit of all of those things. Obviously, depending on the application, you're sometimes beholden to the models that they're ultimately using. We know that a lot of organizations are making it so you can be more flexible in that. Obviously, having smart routing or fallback models where you don't need the latest and greatest high valued model to be crunching all of that data for you. But the biggest thing that is often missed, that a lot of our customers really appreciate about what we're doing, is that although a lot of applications and a lot of GPT windows have gotten a lot smarter from a context perspective to say, okay, Heather's been using this application, it kind of gets to know you, what you're asking, it remembers some of the stuff you've done because they've got some of the semantic caching that's in there. That's great. You and I could be sitting directly next to each other in the same room working on very similar things in the same department, but I have to rebuild my own context layer, which is fine. I'll get the answers that I'm ultimately looking for. But the biggest cost to organizations is you and I can be sitting together right next to each other, and every time you ask the LLM a question or the GPT window a question or the application a question, it is ultimately going to charge you tokens or actions or whatever. I could be asking the exact same questions because there's no centralized context layer. And so we've designed in a centralized context layer, regardless of agent workflow, application, user GPT model. It doesn't matter. The centralized context layer allows for, no matter who asks the question in the organization, once we've seen it once for everybody, and we can provide the answer without it going back to the LLMs every time. So that's a massive savings, and giving IT teams the ability and departmental leaders the ability to review what comes back from not only the knowledge base and what we've built in the centralized context layer, but what comes back from the LLMs, to give it a thumbs up or a thumbs down from an approval standpoint to say, yep, this is good data, increases the accuracy of the prompt the first time. So your point about, is it reprompting? Is it token maxing to get all the things, right? It's not. The centralized context layer with a review queue and approval model allows for better and more accurate responses, regardless of application or agent or whatever it is that it comes from, on the first prompt. That is simply the best way for all companies to save money. Get it right the first time. I don't know if you've had anybody play. We played with, we wanted to use it as a stat. We were being a little cheeky. You'll see in our LinkedIn profiles or on our website, we all created AI caricatures of ourselves, and we wanted to see how many tokens it would use. Now, some of us were less impressed with the results than others, and so we just had to keep reprompting until we were satisfied. And some of us were okay that like the first or second go around, right? But it was like 60,000 tokens. But the people
Wow.
that were not okay, they spent 600,000 tokens to solve the same thing. I worked it out.
That's
It was like, for
huge.
those people, it was like $15.
That's a huge difference, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's just an example I like to pick on, but ultimately, at the end of the day, the point is the same. If you and I are sitting next to each other and we're asking the same question, we're trying to get similar answers, why are we paying for that again? We've already paid for it once. You get my
Right.
point.
No, 100%. And so now thinking about just doing activities versus actually having workflows that'll create value, what do you think that like a CFO, a CTO, a RevOps leader would need to ask in order to understand whether these activities that your team is doing is creating value, or is it just creating activities and using tokens?
Mm. Yeah, the very first thing is, does it save us time? Or is it
Mhm.
just giving us something else to do? Right? In a different way. Is this actually saving us time? There's a lot of scenarios where it does save a lot of time and it should be used. I'll give you an example. I was speaking to somebody, actually, it might have even been you, now that I think about it, gave me an example of an organization that had been using, they started out like everybody else. Their sales team and their SDR team was ultimately going out and they were using it to craft emails and do all this stuff and blast everybody in the universe. And I got my social media posts out and they're doing all that. And it was like, well, we didn't really see any effective gains from that. But instead, they turned it around and they used the LLMs and the GPT models to do account planning and research on their target customers that they wanted to go to. And what they found when they did that was that their people actually went and made, as we used to always do not so long ago, they would write personalized messages or actually pick up the phone and call the customers or prospects, knowing all of this additional information that the LLM was able to compile for them very quickly. And they found and they saw within 2 months, 60 days, they saw a massive change in their pipeline and trajectory on just a simple switch in how they were using AI within their sales and SDR organizations. I'll give you another example. I was talking to a customer last week and they use HubSpot. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that on this, but they use HubSpot. They love
Sure, you
HubSpot.
can.
And high fives to HubSpot. You guys, if any of you are out there watching it, I really have a high appreciation for how you truly did become an AI first company instead of just slapping it on. So kudos. So this customer, he's a senior leader. He had tapped his marketing person to go and start using workflows inside of HubSpot marketing. Well, that person didn't know how to do that. So they went over to ChatGPT and started asking ChatGPT how to build agent workflows inside of HubSpot. And they were putting all kinds of information in this. And I'm talking to a senior leader, and he was like, they were giving out way too much information that shouldn't be in ChatGPT. And I didn't even know they were using it until they told me how they solved it.
Oh,
And
dear.
he was like, well, I'm glad you solved it, but we're not supposed to be putting some of that stuff into ChatGPT. And he was like, I have no idea from a shadow AI perspective how this is working. And I said, well, was it worth it? And he said, what do you mean? I said, do the workflows you now have in HubSpot make the effort worth it? Are you seeing a difference? He goes, I have no idea. I was like, well, why'd you do it in the first place? Well, because everybody else is doing it. I was like, anyways, so that's where we're at. Like, that's just the
Mhm.
reality of the AI space right now. I'm sure they'll prove whether or not they think that's a viable thing for them and if it's making any difference or not. But at the end of the day, I think there's a lot of people, back to my original comment, playing with AI right now because there is no playbook that's out there yet.
Right. And so it really sounds like there aren't just issues around here that AI has a cost, there's issues that usage can spread faster than the visibility into how people are using it. And that brings me to a point that you just mentioned, shadow AI and governance. And so a lot of companies went through shadow IT years ago. And now are we seeing the same pattern with shadow AI?
Yeah, absolutely. If anything, it's probably worse than it was, because there's all kinds of free models of GPT windows that you can just open up and start pumping anything through, right? Um,
Mhm.
Obviously the paid ones are easier to track, even if they're like just sticking it on an expense sheet as a line item at the end of each month. But all of the applications, like there's some applications that are just like, all right, we've stuck, some version of AI, whether it be insights or inference inside of our platform. And yeah, they generally tell you, but sometimes it just kind of happened, right? And
Mhm.
so you don't know what's going where. And it's become a real concern, especially for, again, it's anywhere between the IT organization, security, data privacy office, and the CFO's office, like depending on the organization. They're all very concerned about this because at the end of the day, when we all started working remote, or there's a significantly larger remote workforce since the pandemic, you don't know because you're not sitting there. So you've got capability to see what applications are being installed at times on people's laptops or devices, but you still don't know what they're pumping through those different windows at the end of the day. And shadow AI is going to be hard to solve 100%. You're embedding things on devices, or you're stuck on a specific network or forced through a VPN. It's going to be very hard to get 100% coverage on that. But there are lots of things that can be done, right? That start by aligning applications through a gateway, which is essentially what Cortave is, so that you can see what level of usage is ultimately being processed by each of those applications. You can set up those governance guardrails to say, okay, if they're using it, great. But more importantly, if they're using it, let's make it so email addresses, credit card information, bank account information, all that stuff automatically gets scrubbed. It never makes it to the LLM. We can take out key terms or phrases, or perhaps we have different policies internally that we want to embed within that. So you can't be cussy at the AI, or or whatever it might be, or help me draft a letter to my boss to remind him how much I don't like him, like whatever it may be, right? You can keep that stuff out. And that's becoming more and more of a real concern for organizations. I'd say it's probably even more of a concern than the cost right now, is actually the governance angle.
Now, that makes a lot of sense. And I know that you've mentioned guardrails a few times. What do you feel is the difference between putting guardrails around AI and creating like a bureaucratic approval process that nobody wants to use and everyone wants to bypass?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, there are platforms out there that do governance very well, and they have for years. And, they do a lot of really great stuff. So those organizations that are obviously subjected to regulated compliance, they've already got those things in place, and they should continue to use that stuff. Where we see the guardrails right now, and I'm sure this will expand as we kind of evolve our product, is that we try to keep it very lightweight for organizations, right? Like, let's start with the basics. There's some very obvious things that should never go out into the ether. It's generally speaking, the very standard data privacy issues that you have, or policies most organizations have set up, right? Like, yes, you are not allowed to like take our customer email list and just put it online. Well, sometimes things happen, or you're just thinking like, wouldn't it be great if I have my GPT window and I loaded all my customer contact information in it so it could give me all the things I should say to my customers? This has happened. So you're like, the idea was, it was for good intentions, but you've just pumped all of that information into an LLM that is now out in the ether, and we are in breach of our data privacy policy. So keeping it lightweight so that it's not a tedious or arduous process, and really isn't visible to the general users. It's really the IT and the security organization that will see that. Much like they do all kinds of things with our laptops and stuff in the background to keep us all from the oogie boogies that are out there today, and for good reason. And so that office will continue to have the tools that they need. And that's what we're trying to do, is give them more and more tools that they can use to get that observability, get the visibility on what people are using, why they're using it, how frequently are they using it, what's being pushed through the system, and how can we control to make sure that certain things just never make it, test the moat, so to speak.
It makes a lot of sense. And now that we really have framed the problem, like we've talked about unpredictable spend and limited attribution, fragmented governance, let's now talk about the solution layer and make that a little easier to understand. So, for a non technical CFO, COO, or RevOps leader, how would you explain what Cortave does in 1 minute?
Very simply, we look at it from a crawl, walk, run scenario for AI, much like social media back in the day. We're going to give you the tools to be able to observe what is being used, how often it is being used, and see who are the culprits that are using it the most, for better or for worse. From a governance perspective, we give you the ability to, again, set up some of those guardrails or guide rails, put thresholds in so that if you're for some reason have an overzealous marketer like I did at one point, you can get alerted so that can shut that down before you spend over the budget. And then from a cost control perspective, really start to get your arms around what makes sense, and more importantly, be able to renegotiate against the big suppliers. Right? They want you to sign up for tens of millions of actions or tens of millions of tokens, and you're like, no, I don't need all that, because I know with this I can save this much money and turn around this much stuff. I can reduce that bill by 20, 30, 50, 80%, whatever it might be.
Now that makes sense. And it sounds like Cortave really sits between the AI applications and those model providers, right? So, what actually happens in that layer?
Mm, think of it like this. So we're gateway. So for the technical folks out there, they'll understand that pretty quickly. For the non-technical folks, whether it's an agent workflow or an application or a GPT window, we sit in between those things, connected via API keys and tokens. And our centralized semantic context layer that we've built sits underneath of that. So you can build those out. You can bring your own. It's built on a vector database. And the idea is that you can bring those knowledge bases in that continue to build that context. So regardless of where the prompt comes from, whether it be agent, application, or GPT window, it it's going to come through, and the semantic intelligence is going to say, have I seen this before, or something like it? And if the answer is yes, it looks through the context layers and ultimately provides a response back in any of those lanes that says, hey, this is the answer to what you're looking for, and the tokens never have to go all the way through. If it hasn't seen it before, goes, that's a new one. I haven't seen that before. And it takes the context of your organization that builds over time, obviously. It takes your prompt, looks at it through the context, and then creates its own version of what it needs to send to the LLMs based upon your smart routing and fallback models, and gets a response. It then takes that response from the LLMs, passes it back through the context layers, and gives it to wherever it needs to go, whoever put the prompt in the first time. Once it's done that, it saves that response in the caching and has a decay rate on it, but it saves it in there for future use. So again, Mike asks the question one day, Heather asks the same question the next day. It goes, I've already seen this before, Heather, because Mike was just asking me about it yesterday, and here's the answer, right? And it increases that overall accuracy score.
So, knowing all of this, where do you feel like companies tend to get the quickest improvements when they're using your platform?
There's a couple lanes. The first is they absolutely get from a governance perspective, right? Again, that seems to be a hot topic over the last few weeks. Allows them to see and just ensure that at a minimum checking the boxes, like, are we being responsible with our data, and how people are ultimately integrating these systems internally. The second is definitely the centralized context layer. The centralized context layer, again, it just drives that first prompt accuracy score up so fast that they see massive returns. A lot of people are doing smart routing and fallback models and semantic caching and things of that nature. But at the end of the day, the centralized context layer is really what is saving everybody a lot of money. You can have people that prompt and reprompt things anywhere from multiple times to many dozens of times, depending on what they're trying to do. And seeing that happen and getting that for us internally, it's a 95% first prompt accuracy rating. We've got another partner that's using it and they're about the same. Depending on what they're doing, it's 92 to 93% accuracy on the first prompt. That saves massive amounts of money and again gives companies the ability to negotiate token and AI costs from a position of understanding as opposed to I have no idea.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, I know a lot of our audience includes people like consultants, operators, and other builders who help clients implement systems. I'd love to talk about where do you feel this fits for partners and service providers? So, say for consultants and AI builders serving clients, where does AI cost governance fit in the value chain?
Yeah. So actually, the very first early adopters we had in our platform were all managed services partners or IT services partners. They got it right away. They're either being tasked with building AI solutions for their customers or agent workflows or whatever it might be, or they're the ones that are in some instances managing the IT organization or the security organization for their customers. And so the value had multiple lanes to it. So the first was it gave them a competitive advantage as they were going out and bidding for new projects. And that was by way of, by and large, dollar to dollar on services hours and the amount of hours it's going to take to do a project. Everybody's going to come in about the same. But they knew that they could start going in and pitching like, we know that we can drive down the AI cost when we do this right the first time and be able to showcase why the AI spend when they were quoting it would be a lot less. And so they started using it that way. The second thing is we've got a really robust partner team and very experienced partner team that has seen a lot of different versions of what good looks like. And we want to make it very simple for our partners. I want to be the speedometer on the car. Who makes speedometers? I don't know, but there's one on every car. We want to be the low cost software vendor that works with channel partners to ultimately drive revenue and value for customers, but also for themselves. And so we get into a rev share model depending on the level of support that they ultimately want to provide. In my perfect world, down the road, I will do 90% of my business through partners and they will be the face to the customer. And it's like telephones back in the day, right? You just can go install the telephone. Um, and so they immediately got an opportunity because we know how bumpy the services world has been over the last year with AI. It gives them an opportunity to capture MRR and have a reason to stick around with their customer post project and post launch and give them more opportunities to bring more systems online.
And speaking of that, like introducing Cortave into a client environment, what do you feel makes a good first use case for a partner or advisor to consider?
Yeah, we actually have a playbook coming out in 2 weeks about this, which I'll share with you. But ultimately, it just depends on where the customer is on the adoption maturity curve, right? So we talked about crawl, walk, run. Some customers are very much, a lot of them, honestly, 90% are very firmly in the very first bucket of we have no idea what's happening and who's using it, why they're using it, and if it's even worth using. So that's the first thing. So giving them the ability to be able to do that in those instances. And the ones that have a little more maturity and have obviously been running pilots or maybe even fortunate enough to actually launch production agentic workflows and solutions, they're very concerned about the governance angle. So for them, it's the ability to at least be able to start to get some of those guide rails in place, and then obviously, depending on the organization, IT, engineering heavy organizations are obviously concerned about token spend, vibe coding, things like that. And those that have agent workflows that are out there that have, are put in, well, the one enterprise customer I'm working with has 65,000 cases that come through their support queue a month, which turns into many, many actions a
Uh-huh.
month. And so being able to help reduce that cost by using knowledge base and our centralized context layer help them basically renegotiate that contract. So it just depends on the maturity curve, but that's the playbook that's coming out in a couple weeks. That's the whole purpose, is to like give everybody kind of at least the first pass at the keys to success on what to be thinking about.
No, that's amazing, and I can't wait to see that playbook. That sounds really great. Now, knowing all of this, we've talked about a lot of things today. What's the one takeaway you want listeners to remember from this conversation?
Uh, I think the biggest thing that everybody needs to keep in mind is that despite all of the noise out there is a lot of people that are self-proclaimed experts of AI. Unless you know they've been working on like machine learning models for 10 plus years, there's only but a handful of AI experts on this planet. And don't believe everything you read. That's probably the biggest thing. Instead, look for tools that are going to, not just from the big vendors that are telling you got to jam in agentic workflows or use these AI capabilities on that stuff. Look for tools that help solve the answers, right? Or at least give you the ability to start investigating in a sensible way, right? Who's using what? Why are they using it? How can we control where our data is going and not going, and what can we do from a cost perspective? That's the main thing.
Oh, that's fantastic. And Mike, I really feel like this has been a great conversation. And I think one of the big takeaways that I got from this is that AI cost governance is not about doing less with AI. It's about making sure AI can scale responsibly with visibility into where spend is going, which workflows are creating value, and where teams can be creating avoidable waste or risk. And for listeners who want to learn more about reducing the AI interference waste and bringing governance to token spend, where should they go next? Should they visit Cortave.ai, book a demo, explore pricing, try a token calculator, connect with you on LinkedIn? Like, what do you think?
You can do all of the above. We will be updating our website. So a lot of what I've been talking about, we've got a new product. We have a new version of our product that's launching in about 3 weeks. It'll be the AI operations platform. So you're going to see a lot on our website right now is still kind of where we evolved from, which is around AI cost control and AI cost governance. There will be a lot more coming out in the next couple weeks on the website, but also in the playbook about an AI operations platform first. But if you want to connect with us, there's lots of ways to do that on the website. If you want a demo, we can do that. It all links to the same place. It's cortave.ai. We tried to make it very simple. You can absolutely connect with me on LinkedIn. You can see I have no problem sharing my thoughts on things. So happy to do so. Yeah, absolutely engage with us. We know everybody's trying to figure this out. We don't claim to be experts either. We're just trying to give everybody the tools so that we can all mind meld and share what we know together.
Now, Mike, thank you so much again for joining us. And for everyone listening, we'll include those links to Cortave and the episode resources in the show notes. And also be sure to like and share this episode, especially if you found some value in it. So, thank you again for joining us on Pipeline to Profit, and we'll see you next time.